In a forgotten corner of the desert, a Navy SEAL lay broken. A nurse clung to her last breath, and a war dog fought through agony in the dark. They were never meant to survive. They were meant to disappear. But when the night turned to fire, a bond forged in pain became unstoppable. One soldier, one healer, one loyal K9, and a miracle that defied every rule of war. If you believe courage still lives in this world, if you believe hope can rise from the ashes, then this is a story you cannot miss. Hit subscribe and follow us for more true stories that will shake your heart and lift your spirit. The desert night hung low and suffocating, a blanket of heat and dust pressed against a city carved apart by war. Lieutenant Ethan Hale moved like a shadow between collapsed buildings, every step deliberate, every breath controlled. At 33, he carried the hardened physique of a career Navy SEAL, broad shoulders beneath a sand-coated tactical vest, sinewy arms marked by faint scars, and a posture carved by discipline rather than pride. His face, angular and sharply defined, held the stoic calm of someone who had lived long enough with danger to consider it a familiar companion. Short, dark brown hair clung to his scalp with sweat, and his deep-set gray eyes seemed to absorb every flicker of movement in the night. His skin, sun-burnished and weather-worn, told the story of a man who had spent more years under hostile skies than peaceful ones. But beneath his controlled breathing, a weight pressed against his chest. Duty, memory, and the sharp edge of a past he rarely allowed himself to revisit. There had been a mission in Somalia 3 years ago. One bad call, 1 minute of hesitation, and he had lost a teammate he considered a brother. That regret lived inside him like a stubborn thorn, invisible but always felt. It was the quiet ghost that shaped every decision he made, every risk he calculated, every step he took tonight. At his side, padded Ranger, his K9 partner, a 4-year-old Belgian Malinois, muscular yet lean, with tan and black fur that rippled over a body engineered for war. The dog's ears were erect, sweeping each breeze, and his amber eyes burned with an intelligence that unnerved most people who met him. Ranger had survived 3 deployments, carried shrapnel scars beneath his harness, and had been trained in assault, explosives detection, stealth tracking, and silent takedowns. He moved with surgical precision, his gait soft and controlled, exuding a lethal readiness that mirrored Ethan's own. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured without looking down, his voice low, steady, nearly swallowed by the wind. Ranger responded with a subtle dip of the head, slowing just enough to match Ethan's rhythm. Ahead, the ruins of Al-Harim district stretched like the skeleton of a once vibrant city. Buildings leaned precariously, walls torn open by mortar fire, windows shattered like jagged teeth. Smoke from distant fires drifted across the skyline in thin, ghostly ribbons. The mission had been clear. A group of humanitarian aid workers had gone silent 48 hours ago. No communication, no distress signal. U.S. intelligence suspected abduction by a splinter militia group. But as Ethan advanced toward the designated target, a half-collapsed 3-story complex once used as a community clinic, something in the air felt wrong. Too quiet, too staged, too intentional. He scanned the street. Thermal signatures, none. Movement markers, none. Ambient noise, only wind. But his instincts, honed through a decade of surviving ambushes and battlefields, whispered danger. "Ranger, halt." The dog froze instantly. Ethan lowered to one knee, raising binoculars to his eyes. Through the murky haze, he picked apart the cracked facade of the building. A door hung crookedly from its hinges, swinging in the wind. Broken medical signs flapped against rusted frames. The structure looked abandoned, but not naturally abandoned. Debris had been cleared in strangely neat patterns. Bullet impacts were old, but scorch marks near the windows were new, a trap disguised as decay. Ethan's pulse slowed, dropping into the calm rhythm that always preceded combat. His mind sharpened, memories quieted, regret evaporated. This was a setup, a lure meant for him, or for men like him. He touched the radio at his shoulder. Spectre 1 to command, approaching target building. No movement yet, but something's off. Static hissed before command replied. "Copy, Spectre 1. Continue to objective. Satellite shows no hostiles in the area." Ethan's jaw tightened. Technology lied. Instinct didn't. The constellation of tension in his chest tightened another notch. Not fear, but the cold anticipation of an operator who expects violence like others expects sunrise. He moved again, quieter now. Ranger slunk ahead, nose sweeping the ground in the calculated arcs. The dog paused suddenly, ears tilting. Ethan followed the animal's gaze. Tracks, boot prints, fresh, no more than a few hours old. But the troubling detail wasn't the direction. It was the spacing, the discipline, the uniform depth. These weren't militia footfalls. They were military. "Someone else has been here," Ethan whispered. Ranger released a low rumble in agreement. They advanced to the clinic's entrance. Ethan pressed his shoulder to the wall, lifted his rifle, and peered inside through a jagged crack. Darkness swallowed most of the interior, but faint outlines took shape. Overturned beds, splintered equipment, scattered medical kits. The shadows weren't random, they hid something. He signaled Ranger. The dog stepped forward, sniffing the entryway. His muscles tensed, his breathing slowed, the tip of his tail stiffened. He had found something. Ethan crouched beside him and traced the dog's nose toward a faint metallic glint beneath the debris. A wire, tripwire, tight, thin, expertly concealed. Jesus! He followed its path with careful eyes. It led behind a torn mattress, disappearing into darkness. Not a crude explosive, not militia work, something far more precise. Ethan shifted slightly, putting weight on the opposite knee as old injury soreness flared for a moment. Somalia again. Shards of memory threatened to push through. Blood in the sand, the sound of a teammate's last breath. But he blocked it out, forcing the past back into its box. "Trap confirmed," he said quietly into the radio. "This wasn't done by irregular forces. It's professional." "Copy. Should we pull you out?" Ethan shook his head, though no one could see. "No, if this place is wired, the hostages might still be inside," proceeding with caution. He clipped the radio back and exhaled slowly. Ranger's gaze lifted to meet his, steady, unflinching. The dog didn't need words. He understood the stakes. They entered. Inside, the clinic air was thick, stale, heavy with the smell of burnt chemicals. Debris crunched softly under Ethan's boots. Every corner felt sharp. Every shadow held breath. He cleared the first room, empty. Second room, medical charts scattered on the ground. A child's patient band, smears of blood, not fresh. Third room, a gurney overturned, a single sandal, rope fibers on the ground. Hostages had been here, and they had been moved, hurriedly. But why leave traps unless... His thought snapped abruptly as Ranger stiffened. "What is it?" Ethan whispered. Ranger's nose pressed to the ground, then lifted, pointing deeper into the building. His ears flattened, not in fear but in focused aggression. He smelled something. Someone. Ethan moved forward, rifle up, stepping over debris. The corridor narrowed, closing in like a throat. Light flickered weakly from a half-broken lantern mounted on the wall. The illumination revealed something etched on the plaster. Letters carved hastily with a blade. "Run. Fresh." The dust around the cuts still clinging to the grooves. A warning, or a last message from someone who knew they were being hunted. Ranger suddenly growled low, the sound vibrating through the corridor. Ethan didn't question it. He trusted that growl more than intel, more than satellites, more than command. He pivoted, scanning left. A distant click echoed. Metal hitting metal. Not from him, not from Ranger. A trigger. "Down!" He dove behind a support beam as a deafening blast punched through the hallway. Fire roared down the corridor, sweeping debris like shrapnel. Ranger launched himself sideways, barely out of the explosion's path. Dust engulfed them. Ethan's ears rang violently, vision blurring. He crawled forward, heart thundering, checking Ranger first. The dog shook off soot, unharmed, eyes alert. Relief punched into Ethan so hard it hurt. A good boy, good boy. He lifted himself and coughed out dust. The explosion wasn't meant to kill. It was meant to push them deeper into the building. He knew the tactic. Tight corridors, controlled detonations, force movement, herd targets. A hunting pattern. Ethan's pulse slowed again. Someone wanted him to walk into something. Something precise. Something planned. He reached the end of the scorched hall, pushing into the clinic's basement stairwell. Ranger trotted ahead, sniffing rapidly, tail low. The deeper they descended, the colder the air became, unnatural for the desert. At the base of the stairs, Ethan found the door half open. A thin trail of shoe prints, different from the earlier ones, led inside. He swept his light through the crack and stepped in. The basement was vast, scattered with old medical crates and canvas stretchers. The concrete walls were stained with age and water damage. Near the back wall hung a large plastic sheet, swaying slightly despite the still air. Ranger growled again. Ethan approached slowly, raising his rifle. He gripped the plastic sheet and yanked it aside. His breath stopped. Behind the sheet was a narrow tunnel, recently dug, reinforced with wooden beams. But the ground told the real story. Footprints, lots of them, hostages, approximately 6, judging by stride variation, dragged, not walking. And beside those prints, military boots, pattern consistent, depth uniform. Not militia, not bandits, organized soldiers, professionals. Ethan's heart tightened in his chest, beating with that cold, familiar rhythm of impending conflict. Someone had staged the abduction. Someone wanted the United States to send men like him. Someone had arranged all of this with purpose. He whispered, almost to himself, "This wasn't a kidnapping. It's a trap." Ranger pressed close to Ethan's leg, eyes fixed on the dark tunnel ahead, muscles twitching with anticipation. Ethan swallowed a breath that tasted of dust and danger. His past mistakes pressed on him again, failures he refused to repeat. He would not let hostages die. He would not lose Ranger, and he sure as hell would not let himself be outplayed. He clicked his radio. "Command, this is Spectre 1. Confirm this entire site is a setup. Hostages were moved, possibly into an underground transport route. I repeat, this is a trap designed for U.S. forces." Pause, then, Spectre 1, negative. Intelligence is wrong, Ethan snapped. Silence. Then command responded with a rarely heard tone. Uncertainty. "Proceed with caution, Lieutenant." Ethan shut the radio and looked down the pitch-black tunnel. He felt darkness staring back. "Ranger," he whispered, "on me." They stepped forward simultaneously, descending into a throat of shadows, unaware that this decision would alter their lives, and that a stranger, somewhere in that darkness, would soon need them more than either of them imagined. Ethan Hale awoke to darkness thick enough to feel. It pressed against his skull, a dense, suffocating blackness that throbbed behind his eyes. A metallic taste coated his tongue, blood. His wrists burned, plastic zip ties bit deep into his skin. His head felt heavy, his thoughts sluggish, like someone had dragged him through the desert by his boots and left him to dry. For a moment, he didn't know where he was. Then the memory hit him like a shockwave. The tunnel. The false footprints. Ranger's growl. The sudden movement behind him. A strike to the head. A voice he hadn't recognized whispering in accented English. "You came too far." Ethan exhaled, cold anger cutting through the lingering fog. He forced his eyes open again, letting them adjust. Slowly, faint shapes emerged. Rough stone walls, damp floors. A single light bulb flickering somewhere far beyond his field of view. And human silhouettes, several, huddled against the walls like shadows trying to disappear. A prison. Underground. Deep. His pulse steadied. Panic wouldn't help. Evaluate, observe, adapt. His gaze swept the room until it stopped, frozen on the figure lying in the corner. Ranger. The dog's tan and black fur was matted with dust, and even from a distance Ethan saw the unnatural bend in one of Ranger's hind legs. The dog's neck was chained to an iron ring drilled into the wall. A thick canvas muzzle strapped across Ranger's snout made him release a low, muffled rumble of pain. Ethan inhaled sharply, chest tightening. Ranger was breathing, but the rise and fall of his ribs were shallow, strained. Ethan's heart clenched. He tried to move. Instinct, reflex, desperation. But the zip ties held firm. The scrape of his boots across concrete drew attention. A few of the hostages lifted their heads. One of them, a woman, turned fully toward him, her face pale but alert in the half-dark. She was sitting on the floor next to an older woman, whose arm was wrapped with a dirty cloth, soaked through with dried blood. The younger woman had been tending to her. Ethan blinked through the haze, focusing on her features. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Lena Morris, he'd later learn. She had light brown hair, long but messy, tied back with a torn elastic band. Her skin was fair beneath the streaks of dust, and her eyes, emerald green, were sharp, compassionate, and exhausted all at once. She was tall for a woman, perhaps 5'9", slender but not fragile. Her posture suggested someone used to long hours on her feet, in hospitals or disaster zones. She wore a faded beige medical shirt under a torn scarf, both covered in grime. Sweat clung to her brow, yet she carried herself with a steadiness that didn't belong in a place like this. A healer's resilience, a survivor's instinct. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable but not fearful, not like the others who kept their heads low. Then she spoke, her voice low but steady. "You're awake." Ethan forced his throat to work. "Yeah." His voice came out hoarse. "Where are we?" "Some kind of underground building. Maybe beneath the old clinic," she whispered. "We were brought here 2 days ago, I think. It's hard to tell without daylight." Ethan nodded slightly, his head throbbed. "You're American?" She hesitated, then nodded. "Lena Morris, Doctors United. Our team was ambushed while delivering supplies." Her gaze flicked to Ranger. "Your dog? He was with you when they dragged you in." Ethan swallowed, the guilt cutting deep. He glanced again at Ranger. The dog had lifted his head slightly but remained trembling, trapped by the muzzle. "They heard him," Ethan said quietly, the words tasting like ashes. "They hurt all of us," Lena murmured, "but he's in the worst shape." Ethan shifted again, testing the zip ties. They barely budged. His breathing grew harsher. "What about the others?" 6 hostages total, Lena said. 2 injured, 1 badly. They haven't fed us much, water only twice a day. They don't care if we make it or not." Her voice wavered, but only for a second. Then it hardened. "You need to stay still for now. The guards check frequently." Ethan's mind raced. "How long was I out?" "Several hours," she said. "They brought you in unconscious." "My team?" Lena shook her head. "I didn't see anyone else." A crack ran through Ethan's chest. Wrench, Doc, and the others were out there somewhere, alive or dead, he didn't know. But he couldn't dwell on it. Not now. He focused instead on the cold concrete beneath him, the heavy air, the hostage's ragged breathing, the faint drip of water from somewhere in the darkness. Then, Ranger let out a broken, pained whine. Ethan snapped his head toward him. Ranger's eyes were half open now, searching for Ethan, desperate for reassurance. Ethan leaned forward as far as he could. "I'm here, buddy," he whispered, voice thick. "Stay still. I'll get you out." Ranger whined again, softer, a plea, a question. Ethan's muscles tensed. "His leg," Ethan said. "It's broken. Someone needs—" "I know," Lena interrupted gently. "I've been watching him since they dragged you in." Ethan blinked. "You have medical training?" "Trauma nurse," she murmured. 8 years, earthquake zones, refugee camps, war relief missions." She lowered her eyes. "This isn't the worst place I've been, but it's close." Ethan stared at her, this slender woman with trembling hands but a spine of steel, tending strangers in a hellhole. She didn't belong here. She didn't deserve this. A heavy metal scrape split the air. The door. A guard stepped in. A large, thick-necked man with oily black hair and a square jaw framed with dark stubble. His expression was flat, bored, but his eyes were cold. He carried an AK-style rifle slung lazily in one hand. His clothes were dirty military fatigues, boots scuffed. Ethan judged him instantly. Undisciplined but violent. Not militia. Something else. The guard scanned the room, lingering only briefly on Ethan before tossing a small burlap sack to the ground. Bread. Hard as stone. Then he pointed to a rusty bucket near the door. "Water," he grunted in broken English. His gaze shifted to Ranger. The dog growled, muffled but furious. The guard smirked and kicked dirt toward him before leaving. The door slammed. The darkness returned. Ethan clenched his jaw. The anger inside him burned hotter. Lena reached for the sack, distributing small crumbs to the hostages. But she didn't eat. She saved the last piece. Her eyes softened as she looked toward Ranger. "He hasn't had anything for hours," she whispered. "He won't take food from anyone but me," Ethan said quietly. "Not unless he's desperate." Lena didn't move instantly. Her gaze studied Ethan carefully. "If I approach him slowly, he might trust me. He needs water. I can soften the bread with mine. It might be the only way he eats." Ethan stared at her, shock and gratitude clashing inside him. You'd give him your water? Lena nodded once. He's in pain, and he's scared, and he's important to you. That's enough reason. Ethan's throat tightened unexpectedly. You don't have to. I know, she whispered, but I'm doing it anyway. She took her small tin cup, their only ration for the night, and soaked the bread until it turned into a soggy mash. The other hostages watched, fearful. The older woman beside her grabbed her arm. Lena, dear, don't. That animal could bite. He won't, Lena whispered. Not if I'm careful. Ethan held his breath as Lena slowly crossed the cell. Ranger growled at first, deep, pained, defensive. Lena didn't retreat. Instead, she lowered herself onto her knees a meter away, body angled sideways, hands lowered, eyes focused on Ranger's wound rather than his face. Hey, she whispered, voice soft and calm. You're such a brave boy. I know you're hurting. Ranger's growl faltered, confusion, pain, instinct wrestling with instinct. She placed the mashed bread on the ground and gently nudged it toward him with her foot. It's okay, she whispered. This is for you. Ranger sniffed weakly. Ethan felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, Ranger leaned forward. His tongue slipped out through the muzzle just far enough to touch the wet bread. He ate. Ethan released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Lena stepped back, watching him with relief softening her features. Her compassion wrapped the dim, filthy cellar in a warmth Ethan hadn't felt in days. She met his eyes across the room. Something unspoken passed between them. Gratitude, respect, something else neither of them had the words for. Ethan nodded once. A soldier's gesture, a promise. Lena returned it with a small, exhausted smile before helping the older woman back to her place. Ranger lay his head down, but the trembling in his body eased. The constant growl faded. Ethan looked around the cellar, at the captives, at the chains, at Ranger's pain, at Lena's bravery, and a resolve hardened inside him. He wasn't dead. Ranger wasn't dead. These people weren't dead. Not yet. And as long as he was breathing, he would not let this place become their grave. He would find a way out. He would get Ranger on his feet again. And he would protect the woman who had risked everything for a dog she didn't know. As the dim light flickered overhead, Ethan closed his eyes briefly, centering himself, letting that resolve anchor him. Something had shifted in the dark, a spark, a fragile thread of hope, and it began with her. As Chapter 2 concludes, Ethan is captured in an underground dungeon with several hostages, including Lena Morris, a compassionate American trauma nurse. Ranger is severely injured and muzzled. Despite her own fear and exhaustion, Lena uses her precious water to comfort and feed Ranger, becoming the single light in a hopeless place, earning Ethan's deep respect. The third night in the underground cellar was the coldest yet. Ethan Hale sat with his back against the damp wall, his wrists raw from the zip ties, his muscles sore from days of forced stillness and exhaustion. His body was built for movement, for missions, for impact, for storms, and the confinement gnawed at him more viciously than hunger. The stale air hung heavy with mildew, rust, sweat, and the quiet despair of people who were running out of hope. Still, Ethan's mind refused to shut down. It never did. Not even in the worst moments of Somalia, or the weeks after he buried one of his closest brothers. He had learned something then, something carved into him by grief and duty. When the world collapses, your mind becomes the last weapon. And Ethan Hale had no intention of surrendering that weapon, not now. Ranger lay near him, still chained to the wall, but breathing more steadily. The wound had begun to clot, and the trembling that once shook the dog's entire body had eased. Lena Morris had cleaned the gash again that morning, using the last of her hidden antiseptic wipes. She had risked angering the guards by keeping a bit of the water inside her cupped hands just long enough to wash Ranger's leg properly. He remembered watching her hands, slender but steady, working through fear with a nurse's discipline. Ethan used to think he'd seen every kind of bravery, combat, sacrifice, brotherhood. But this woman's courage was made of something quieter, softer, and somehow fiercer. Around them, the hostages slept or pretended to, curled forms wrapped in dirty rags, shivering in the dark. But Ethan was awake. Lena was awake too, Though she sat near the far wall, her shoulders hunched from exhaustion as she wrapped another strip of cloth around the older woman Martha's arm. Martha had a fever now. Ethan could tell by the flush on her cheeks and the way her breaths came shallow and rapid. Not good, not sustainable. Ethan watched Lena wipe sweat from the elderly woman's forehead, whispering reassurances she didn't have the strength to believe herself. Lena's light brown hair had fallen loose from its tie, framing her tired face in messy waves. Her eyes, green, steady, intelligent, shone with a stubborn flame that surprised Ethan every time he looked at her. She was afraid, she was exhausted, she was starving, and still she kept moving. Still she kept caring. Ethan admired her more than he knew how to admit. A metallic clatter echoed down the stairwell. The hostages stiffened. Ranger growled instinctively. The door slammed open. It wasn't the brute this time. It was the other guard, the younger one with narrow shoulders, a patchy beard, and jittery hands. Ethan had privately nicknamed him Slim. Slim's anxious brown eyes darted over the prisoners, then up at the stairwell behind him, as if terrified of someone chasing him. His military fatigues hung loose on his thin frame, and his boots were untied. A sloppy, frightened man, barely older than 20, the kind of guard you could scare just by breathing wrong. Slim held a tray with shallow cups of water, barely enough to wet their lips, and tossed it onto the floor, almost dropping it. "Drink," he muttered in broken English. His voice trembled. Ethan memorized everything about him, the way he fidgeted with his rifle strap, the bruise on his cheek, the nervous twitch in his jaw. A man like this cracked easily. He could be manipulated. Slim retreated quickly, slamming the door shut behind him. Ethan leaned slightly toward Lena. "He's scared," Ethan whispered. Lena glanced at him, her voice soft. "I've seen it too. He avoids the corners. He jumps at every sound. He doesn't want to be here." Ethan nodded slowly. "He's our weak point." Lena looked down. "You'll use him." "We'll need him," Ethan corrected. Her eyes softened. "Then we'll use him." The fact that she said we made something stir in Ethan's chest. They weren't just surviving now, they were planning. Across the room, Ranger lifted his head and sniffed the air. Ethan watched him closely. Even injured, the dog's instincts were razor sharp. Ranger's ears perked, then swept toward the far wall. His nose twitched, then he growled, low, soft, focused. Ethan stiffened. "What is it, boy?" Ranger's gaze locked on a darkened corner behind a stack of rotting burlap sacks. Ethan studied the area. Nothing was visible except shadows, but Ranger kept staring. "You smell something?" Ranger growled again. Lena shifted, glancing at Ethan. "He did that yesterday, too. Right there." But the guards didn't notice. Ethan's mind sharpened. It's something they don't want found. He pushed himself to his feet, not standing fully, just enough to edge closer on his knees. Midnight light slipped weakly through a small grate near the ceiling. It wasn't much, but enough to reveal textures. Ethan moved toward the corner. Ranger's growl grew louder. When Ethan reached the wall, he placed his hands against the stone. Cold, damp, too damp. The rest of the cellar was dry, except for the dripping pipe overhead. But here, the wall felt soft. Moisture had been gathering behind it. Ethan scraped a piece of mortar loose with his fingernail. It crumbled instantly, a sandy, degrading mess. "This wall," Ethan murmured. It wasn't built like the others. Lena moved toward him and crouched beside him, her breath visible in the cold. "You think it's weakened?" "I think," Ethan said slowly, "this is how they access the tunnels, or where they hide something they don't want discovered." Lena touched the wall gently. Mortar dust smeared her hand. She looked up, meeting Ethan's eyes. "We could open this?" Ethan nodded. "But we can't do it alone." He looked around at the hostages, weak, sick, terrified. They could help, but only if the guards didn't catch on. And the brute, if he saw even a crack in the wall, would beat them all senseless. Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. "I can gather information. They make me check the others every morning. I walk the upper level sometimes. I'll look for tools, patterns, guards, anything useful." Ethan shook his head instinctively. "Too dangerous." "Everything here is dangerous," Lena whispered back, her eyes sharp. "But I'm not helpless. I can do this." Ethan swallowed. He wasn't used to working with civilians, especially not ones this brave, this stubborn, this willing to risk themselves. "If you get caught, then I get caught," she said softly. "But I won't let these people die." She looked at Ranger. "And I won't let him die either." Ethan exhaled slowly. His chest tightened in a way that felt strangely unfamiliar. He wasn't sure if it was worry or admiration. Maybe both. That night, the restless sleep of the captives was broken by low murmurs and quiet scraping. Ethan and Ranger stayed awake, listening, planning, thinking, and waiting. The next morning, Slim came again with water, and as always, he avoided the far corner completely, never stepping near it, never even glancing at it. That confirmed Ethan's suspicion. Slim dropped off the bucket and left in a hurry. When the heavy metal bar outside slid shut, Lena leaned toward Ethan. "I saw 2 new guards yesterday," she whispered. "One older, heavier, walks with a limp. The other tall, shaved head, wears a vest with extra magazines." Ethan processed that instantly, adding it to the mental map he was building. Guard rotation, behavior, weak points. "Good," he whispered. "Anything else?" Lena nodded. "There's a weapons cache upstairs. I saw rifles, grenades, and gear stacked behind a metal grate. They're preparing for something." Ethan's mind snapped through possibilities. A move, a convoy, or an attack. "If they're moving," Lena whispered, "they might take us with them." Ethan's jaw clenched. "Or kill us before they leave." Lena looked him dead in the eyes. "Then we have to be out before that happens." Later that day, Lena was taken upstairs again under armed watch. Ethan watched her disappear, chest tight. He trusted her courage, but every step she took was a risk. When she returned hours later, she knelt beside Ethan and whispered with urgency. "The older guard with the limp, he sits near the stairs in a chair. He sleeps sometimes. The young one, you called him Slim, he patrols but not well. And the caches, still unguarded when he's alone." Ethan nodded slowly, the beginnings of a plan forming. Lena continued. "And there's more." She lowered her voice further. "Behind the water bucket, I heard something, a faint hum." "A generator?" Ethan guessed. "Maybe powering something deeper." "Maybe powering a tunnel," Lena corrected. "Or a door." Ethan's heartbeat quickened. Everything was aligning. Weak wall, weak guard, weak routine, hidden infrastructure. And then Ranger lifted his head and sniffed again toward the crumbling wall. Ethan crawled there again. Ranger's nose pressed near the bottom edge of the stone. The dog whined softly. "He smells airflow," Ethan whispered. "There's a tunnel behind this wall, maybe a whole passage system." Lena nodded. "We can break through it." Ethan shook his head. Not with bare hands, but he noticed something, a bent metal frame supporting a rotten cot nearby. Jagged, loose, sharp. He pulled it free quietly. A crude tool, not ideal, but enough to start. And that night, when the guards were gone, when the cellar had fallen into its cold silence, Ethan began scraping, slowly, patiently. Every drag of metal against mortar was a quiet promise to himself. They would not die here. Not Lena, not Ranger, not these people, not him. Hours passed. Mortar crumbled like wet sand. Ranger watched him, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, tail tapping weakly on the floor, a small, soft encouragement. By dawn, the wall had a thin fissure, enough to see the outline of a hollow behind it, enough to know he was right, enough to give them hope. Lena knelt beside him, touching the crack with trembling fingers. "You found it," she whispered. Ethan shook his head. "Ranger found it. You made it possible." Their eyes met again, the air between them warm despite the icy cellar. They were no longer strangers, no longer captives waiting to die. They were a team, and they were close, so close. As Chapter 3 concludes, Ethan observes the guards for days, discovering a weakened wall behind a leaking pipe. Lena secretly provides intelligence about guard patterns and weapons, while Ranger, despite being injured, detects airflow toward a hidden tunnel. Together, their growing bond becomes the force that keeps them alive. The night the escape began was the kind of night the desert used to fear. The wind had died completely, leaving only a suffocating stillness that hung over the underground cellar like the lid of a coffin. Ethan Hale stood near the weakened wall, his breathing controlled, his body coiled with purpose. Days of starvation had carved deeper shadows beneath his eyes, but his muscles still held the power of a soldier born for conflict. Ranger lay next to him, his injured hind leg tucked beneath his body, but his eyes, sharp amber flames, were fixed on the crack in the mortar. He knew what Ethan knew. Tonight was the night. Lena Morris watched from across the cellar, her back straight despite exhaustion, her hands trembling only slightly. She had braided her hair back again, tying it with a strip of cloth from her shirt. The green eyes that once shone with fear now carried something else: steadiness, resolve, and beneath it, a quiet trust that anchored Ethan more than he liked to admit. The other hostages huddled together in tense silence. Martha, feverish but still conscious, whispered prayers under her breath. Two younger aid workers, a husband and wife, both with sunken cheeks and dirt-streaked skin, clutched each other tightly. This group was all Ethan had now. He would not fail them. Not after everything. "Shift change is in 5 minutes," Lena whispered as she moved to Ethan's side. Being forced to help in the upper levels every morning had given her glimpses of the routine. Valuable glimpses. Dangerous ones. "Slim takes over first," she added. Her voice carried the quiet tremble of someone trying to mask fear with determination. "The brute follows 10 minutes later." Ethan nodded. Slim's fear, his twitching hands, his sloppy patrol patterns, all of it had made him predictable. Predictability meant opportunity. "Once Slim opens the door," Ethan murmured, "we move." Ranger lifted his head, catching the shift in Ethan's tone. His ears perked, muscles tightened. "Ready?" Ethan placed his hand on the dog's harness and whispered, "Just like we trained, but take it easy on that leg." Ranger released a soft grunt, as if offended by the suggestion of fragility. Ethan almost smiled. Thunk. The heavy metal bar outside the door slid away. Ethan stiffened. Silence fell like a shroud over the cellar. The door creaked open, revealing Slim. The guard's gaunt face was sheen with sweat. He held a cracked flashlight in one hand and his rifle loosely in the other. His eyes darted nervously across the room. "Water," he muttered, stepping forward. It was the closest he came every day. Close enough for Ethan to see the uncertainty in his posture, the fear sitting in his bones. Ethan waited, listening, watching. Slim's steps faltered when he saw Ethan sitting upright, watching him with a stare far too calm for a hostage. That was the moment Ethan needed. He jerked his chin at Lena. She nodded. The room exhaled. Ethan struck. He launched upward, grabbing the guard's rifle barrel with a precision that came from a decade of combat. He twisted sharply, yanking Slim off balance, then slammed his elbow into the young man's throat. Slim gagged, stumbling backward. Ethan caught him, clamped a hand over his mouth, and dragged him silently to the wall. Slim struggled weakly, fear widening his eyes, but Ethan pressed his face close, whispering through clenched teeth, "Quiet. You're going to help us walk out of here alive?" Slim's chest heaved. He froze. He understood. Lena quickly grabbed the guard's fallen flashlight and switched it off. The hostages watched with wide, terrified eyes. Ethan looked into Slim's pale, trembling face. "Keys," Ethan whispered. Slim nodded frantically and fumbled for the ring at his belt. Ethan snatched it. "If you scream," Ethan warned, "they'll blame you for letting us escape, and they'll kill you first." That broke the last of Slim's resistance. He sagged, defeated. Ethan let him fall to the floor, unconscious but alive. No time to waste. He turned quickly. "Lena, help me with Ranger." Lena was already there. She carefully unlatched the chain around Ranger's neck, while Ethan sawed through the muzzle strap with the guard's knife. When the canvas dropped from Ranger's snout, the dog let out a low, relieved whine and nudged Ethan's arm, the weight of trust pressing through the gesture. "You're free now," Lena whispered, stroking his fur. "You're okay, Ranger." The dog licked her hand, surprising them both. Ethan's chest tightened. "Let's move," he said. He cut the zip ties on every hostage, then guided them to the corner. The crack in the wall was now a thin opening, just wide enough for a person to crawl through. Ethan went first, pushing into the narrow passage. Cold air hit his face. The smell of dirt and metal filled the space. A tunnel, reinforced by wooden beams. Exactly what he expected. Lena came next, supporting Martha with one arm. The other hostages followed silently. Ranger limped behind Ethan, fitting his body through with effort, but never once whining. The tunnel stretched deep into darkness. Ethan whispered, "Flashlight." Lena switched it on. Low beam. The light revealed tracks, footprints, wheel marks, crates, a discarded wrench. Evidence of long-term use. They kept walking, their breaths echoing in the cramped space. The tunnel widened ahead. A metal door waited at the end. Ethan listened. Nothing. He cracked it open slowly. A stairwell. Leading up, and from above, voices, 2 men, one deep, one raspy. Ethan signaled Ranger down. He looked back at Lena. Her face had gone pale, but she nodded. Ethan moved up the stairs, silent as a shadow. The 2 guards stood in a small armory room, lit by flickering bulbs. They were armed, relaxed, talking in low Arabic tones. The older guard with the limp leaned on a crate, smoking. The tall one with the shaved head cleaned his rifle, humming under his breath. Ethan studied their positions, calculated, breathed, then struck. He sprang through the doorway, slamming the tall guard into the wall so hard the man's skull cracked against the metal. The limp guard reached for his rifle, but Ranger lunged, landing perfectly despite his injury, his jaws clamping onto the man's forearm. The guard screamed, dropping his gun. Ethan delivered a precise blow to the man's throat. Silence fell within seconds. Ranger released his grip and backed up, panting but standing tall. "Good boy," Ethan whispered, touching his head. Lena and the hostages entered, wide-eyed. "Take what you can," Ethan said quickly. He grabbed 2 rifles, several magazines, and 2 grenades lying on a shelf. He handed a pistol to Lena. She shook her head firmly. "No, I save lives." Ethan didn't argue. He slipped the pistol back into his vest. "Stay behind me." They moved out of the armory and into a long hallway filled with shadow and dust. A single exit door glowed faintly at the end. Freedom. Almost. They were halfway there when everything stopped. A figure emerged from the darkness ahead, tall, broad, calm. His beard was trimmed, his hair slicked back. He wore tactical gear stolen from previous Western captives. His complexion was olive, eyes sharp and disturbingly intelligent. The leader. Ethan felt it instantly. The cold authority in the man's presence. The aura of cruelty sharpened into something almost methodical. The man's voice was smooth, almost polite. "Lieutenant Hale, I was beginning to wonder if you'd disappoint me." Ethan raised his weapon. "Let them go." The leader smiled faintly. "I'm afraid I can't do that." Before Ethan could move, the leader grabbed Lena, pulling her forward so fast she barely had time to gasp. He wrapped an arm around her chest, using her as a shield, and pressed a pistol to her head. Lena's breath hitched, her green eyes locked on Ethan's, filled with shock but not fear, not yet. Ethan's pulse pounded. Ranger growled, tense and ready to strike. "Drop the rifle," the leader said calmly, "or the nurse dies." Ethan's mind raced. Too far for a clean shot, too risky for a frontal assault. Lena's life hung in the space between heartbeats. "You're making a mistake," Ethan said quietly. "The mistake," the leader replied, "was assuming you could outplay me." Ethan slowly lowered his rifle a fraction, enough to draw the man's eyes, enough to hide his other hand. His left hand moved subtly behind his thigh, 2 fingers, then 1. A small circling motion, Ranger's signal, a silent command learned over years of training. The leader noticed the shift in Ethan's posture, his pistol pressed harder to Lena's temple. "Drop it now!" Ethan flicked his wrist. The signal. Ranger exploded forward. The dog moved like a missile, injured leg forgotten, muscles coiled with months of discipline and instinct. He collided with the leader's gun arm with a force that sent the pistol spinning. The leader staggered, losing grip on Lena. Ethan surged forward, tackling him to the ground. They crashed into a metal crate. The leader swung wildly, a trained fighter, strong, practiced, but Ethan was fueled by something deeper. Rage, duty, fear for the woman behind him. Ethan slammed his elbow into the man's jaw, then drove his knee into the man's ribs. The leader gasped, reaching for a hidden blade. But Ethan grabbed him by the collar and snapped his head back against the crate edge. The man collapsed, unconscious or dead. Ethan didn't check. He didn't need to. He stood, chest heaving, sweat and dust clinging to his skin. Lena stood frozen, hand pressed to her throat, her breath sharp and uneven. Ethan grabbed her shoulders gently. "You okay?" She nodded shakily. Yes, thank you." Ranger limped to her, nudging her hand as if checking she was real, alive. Lena dropped to her knees and hugged the dog tightly. Ethan's voice softened. "We're not done yet." He guided the group to the exit door, pushed it open. A blast of hot night air rushed in. Flames from a nearby explosion lit the sky in orange streaks. Someone had triggered alarms, and the compound was unraveling in chaos. Ethan led them into the burning night, Ranger at his side, Lena close behind, the other hostages following like shadows desperate for dawn. As Chapter 4 concludes, Ethan and Ranger break through the weakened wall, overpower guards, reclaim weapons, and free the hostages. But the terrorist leader ambushes them and seizes Lena as a hostage. In a split-second decision, Ethan signals Ranger to attack, disarming the leader and killing him, allowing the group to escape into the chaos of a burning night. The night sky above the burning compound shifted from a suffocating black to a bruised violet as the first hints of dawn crept over the jagged horizon. Ethan Hale sprinted through the collapsed outer gate, lungs burning, rifle raised in his good hand, his other guiding Lena Morris as she stumbled beside him. Ranger limped ahead, ears pinned back, tracking every sound despite the agony radiating through his injured hind leg. Behind them, the freed hostages ran in a tight group, breathless, terrified, clinging to the hope that survival might finally be within reach. The base had erupted into chaos the moment Ethan killed the terrorist leader. Flames swallowed storage sheds and climbed up the wooden scaffolding, lighting the sand in a hellish orange glow. The echo of panicked gunfire crackled from deeper inside the compound, where remaining militants fought to regain control. Shouts rose in 3 languages: confusion, fury, fear, a collapsing world for the men who had built this prison. But Ethan's focus was not on them. It was on the extraction point, a clearing beyond the ridge, a patch of desert lit in his memory by years of training, a place open enough for a helicopter to land. If Command had received his emergency distress beacon, he just had to get them there alive. Lena tripped on a jagged rock, nearly falling to her knees. Ethan caught her instantly. "Easy," he said, voice low but steady. Sweat streaked through the dust on his face. "Stay with me?" She nodded breathlessly, her green eyes shimmering with exhaustion and adrenaline. She had taken a blow during the scuffle with the leader. Bruises already bloomed along her shoulder and ribs. Yet, even wounded, she pushed forward without complaint, her resolve a quiet force that reminded Ethan why they were all still alive. Martha, the older woman, stumbled behind them. Ethan slowed for half a second. "Lena, take her other side." Lena moved immediately, looping an arm beneath Martha's. The woman leaned into her, trembling, whispering prayers under her breath. Ranger glanced back, as if checking whether the humans were following. The dog's chest heaved, his breath sharp, but his posture stayed alert. Despite everything, days of starvation, chains, pain, he remained a soldier, just like Ethan. "Up the ridge," Ethan said. "Once we're over it, we're in the clear." They reached the base of the hill. Sand shifted under their feet as they climbed. Ethan checked the sky, still silent, still empty. Too empty. If Command received his signal, extraction could be minutes, or it could be never. Halfway up the ridge, a gunshot cracked through the air. Ethan whirled, pushing Lena and Martha down behind a boulder. Ranger jumped in front of Ethan with a fierce growl, stiff-legged despite the pain. 3 militants appeared at the base of the hill, lean men with angular features, dust-caked beards, and dark eyes sharpened by fanatic determination. Their clothing varied, some in mismatched fatigues, others in loose desert robes, but all carried rifles slung with deadly familiarity. One of them, taller than the rest, wore a black bandana wrapped tightly around his head. His gaze locked onto the escaping hostages with murderous focus. Ethan shoved his rifle against his shoulder. "Get down!" He fired. The first shot hit the tall man square in the chest, sending him sprawling. The other 2 dove behind rocks, returning fire. Bullets pinged against stone and kicked sand into the air. The hostages screamed and ducked. Ranger barked, snarling, lowering himself beside Ethan. Ethan fired 3 controlled bursts, forcing the militants deeper into cover. He knew they'd circle around, trying to flank. He'd taught that tactic to trainees himself. Keep moving, he ordered the hostages. Stay low, head for the top. Lena hesitated only for a heartbeat before guiding the group upward, shielding Martha with her own body. Ethan fired again to buy them time. Then, a faint sound, a thumping in the distance, a rhythmic chop through the air. Helicopter rotors. Ethan's heart kicked hard against his ribs. Come on, he whispered. Come on. The sound grew louder, closer, until a sleek black silhouette rose over the ridge. Twin rotors chopped through the dawn air as a U.S. Navy Black Hawk angled toward them, its side door already open. Inside, 2 Navy crewmen in desert flight suits scanned the ridge with mounted lights, searching desperately. Ethan waved one arm high. Spectre 1 here. We have 6 hostages, 1 wounded K-9, 1 injured civilian. Need immediate evacuation. The Black Hawk veered closer. The militants saw it too. Gunfire erupted behind Ethan. Bullets tore through sand near his feet. Ranger barked furiously, charging forward a few steps before Ethan held him back. Stay, Ranger! The dog froze, but his muscles quivered with the urge to fight. Ethan fired, dropping 1 militant. The last man ducked, spraying wild rounds in panic. Ethan dashed up the ridge, knowing they were seconds from disaster. The Black Hawk descended with a rush of air that whipped sand into a storm. Its landing skid slammed onto the flattened crest just as Ethan reached it. A Navy crewman leaned out. Lieutenant Hale, get them inside! Ethan turned back. Lena was struggling up the last few meters, supporting Martha. The others were right behind her, coughing through the sandstorm. Then, a sharp cry. Lena fell to one knee, gripping her side. Martha nearly toppled, but Ranger darted down the slope to brace them, pushing his body against Lena's as support. Ethan bounded down to them. I've got her! He lifted Lena carefully, one arm beneath her knees, the other supporting her back. She gasped but didn't protest, curling instinctively into him as he carried her. You're safe, Ethan said softly. I've got you. Her fingers clutched the fabric of his torn vest. Ethan, thank you. Always. He climbed the rest of the ridge with her in his arms. Ranger limped beside them, refusing to be left behind. The crewman shouted over the rotors. Bring her in! Bring them all in! Ethan stepped into the Black Hawk's cargo bay, lowering Lena onto a padded bench. The medic, a man in his mid-30s with light olive skin, trimmed stubble, and sharp brown eyes, rushed over. His name patch read, Cortez. He moved with the confident precision of someone who had spent years patching up soldiers on the edge of hell. What have we got? Cortez asked, checking Lena's breathing. His voice was steady, but carried an urgency beneath it. Blunt force trauma to the ribs, Ethan said. Possible fracture, no gunshot wounds. Cortez nodded. I'll stabilize her. You did good getting her out. Ethan looked away briefly. Praise felt strange in a moment like this. Behind him, the other hostages scrambled into the helicopter. Martha collapsed into a medic's arms, sobbing with relief. Ranger reached the ramp, but hesitated for the first time. His injured leg trembled violently. Exhaustion pulled at his body like lead. Ethan dropped to one knee in front of him. Come on, Ranger, he whispered. He pressed his forehead gently to the dog's. We're going home. One last jump. Ranger looked at him, eyes full of pain, but trust deeper than instinct. Then he pushed off his good hind leg and leapt into the helicopter. He landed hard, nearly collapsing, but Ethan caught him, pulling the dog into his chest. Good boy, Ethan breathed. Good boy. Sand screamed against the hull as the Black Hawk lifted into the air. The compound below them shrank into a burning skeleton. Gunfire echoed faintly, but could not touch them anymore. Dawn spilled across the desert, bathing the sky in gold. Ethan sat beside Lena, Ranger curled against their legs. The dog rested his head on Lena's lap, eyes finally softening into peaceful slits. Lena stroked Ranger's fur with gentle fingers. He's incredible. He's family, Ethan said quietly. He looked at her, really looked, seeing the exhaustion and pain etched across her features, but also the courage, the fire, the softness. You saved his life. She shook her head lightly. He saved all of ours. Ethan reached out and took her hand, intertwining his rough, calloused fingers with her slender ones. Her grip tightened, not out of fear, but something warmer. A promise, a connection born in darkness, but strengthened by every impossible moment between them. Cortez adjusted the IV line he had placed on Lena. You two can flirt after we stop the bleeding, he muttered, though a grin tugged at the corner of his mouth. Lena flushed slightly. Ethan coughed. Ranger thumped his tail once, as if amused. The Black Hawk cut across the sky, rising steadily toward the horizon. The nightmare behind them dissolved into shrinking smoke trails. Ahead, a sunrise blooming over endless dunes. A new beginning. The Navy crewmen strapped the door shut, sealing them in the vibrating belly of safety. Ethan leaned back against the bulkhead, his arms still wrapped protectively around Lena. "You made it," she whispered. He shook his head. "We made it." Ranger's breathing slowed, rumbling softly against their legs. His eyes closed, trusting the world for the first time in days. Ethan tightened his grip on Lena's hand. She rested her head against his shoulder, and as the helicopter soared into the dawn, sunlight washed over them. 3 survivors bound by fire, pain, and unbreakable loyalty. This was not the end. It was the beginning. As Chapter 5 concludes, a Navy rescue helicopter arrives. Ethan carries the injured Lena aboard, while Ranger, despite his pain, jumps in to reunite with them. On the flight out, Ethan holds Lena's hand, grateful and protective, while Ranger rests peacefully against them. Together, the SEAL, the courageous nurse, and the loyal war dog fly into the dawn, starting a new chapter of hope. In the end, what happened on that broken desert ridge was more than a rescue. It was a reminder that even in the darkest places on Earth, miracles still rise where courage, compassion, and faith meet. A soldier scarred by battle, a nurse who refused to give up, and a wounded war dog who never stopped believing. 3 lives woven together by something far greater than chance. And maybe that's the message for all of us. In our own daily battles, at work, at home, in moments of loneliness or fear, we may feel trapped in our own underground cells, unsure if anyone sees our struggle. But hope often comes in quiet forms. A kind word from a stranger, a friend who refuses to leave, a small act of mercy that restores strength when we thought we had none left. Sometimes the miracle is not the rescue itself, but the people God places beside us to help us endure the storm until the light returns. If this story touched your heart, if it reminded you that bravery still exists, that kindness still matters, that faith still saves, then please help us spread that light. Share this story with someone who might need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us what moved you the most. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss another story of courage and grace. And may God bless you and your family, guide your steps, protect your home, and surround you with the same unshakable love that carried Ethan, Lena, and Ranger into the dawn. Amen.